All righty, let's go ahead and get started then. Welcome, everybody. Another version of the Morning Fuel. We're excited today to have both Mr. McCall and Mr. Treat with us today. I'm going to let Brooke and Adria run most of the questioning. Please don't hesitate to enter questions on the chat, and we'll work them in like we always do. As you know, you'll be the default, your mics will be muted, so you won't be able to talk. With that said, Brooke, let's get it going.
Great. Well, first and foremost, I want to make certain that we thank our guests for coming. Adria will give the introductions. Adria and I are doing this morning fuel from Canyon Creek Energy in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I want to thank Luke Essman and his team for getting us set up. And we'll be visiting with some of our members in Tulsa later today. Look forward to doing some of these actually from around the states and other office locations. So thank you very much to Canyon Creek. Adria, why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Great. It looks like we have the speaker on as well, so perfect timing. But today we have two of our friends at the Capitol that we enjoy working with at the Petroleum Alliance. We have Speaker of the House, Charles McCall, and we have President Pro Tem of the Senate, Greg Treat, on the call with us. They are the two legislative leaders of the two chambers of our state legislature. And so they lead two of the biggest Republican caucuses, the biggest Republican caucuses that we've ever seen here in Oklahoma. So they do both have tough jobs, and we definitely know that and recognize that. But today they're going to give us some of their insight on the 2021 session and talk to us about what we might see and what oil and gas professionals can expect to see in the next legislative session. So Mr. Pro Tem and Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining us. Speaker McCall, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, well, how about this? Mr. Pro Tem, will you just tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about the caucus that you lead?
Yeah, thanks, Adria. Thanks, Brooke. And thanks, David. I really appreciate the opportunity this morning to be with you and the Petroleum Alliance. Huge part of our economy. And I know that these are tough years that we're in. And so I want to acknowledge that right off the bat. When I looked at the certification, it became even more evident just how tough this has been on your industry. Of our whole, about 400 million of it comes from the gross production tax on oil and gas. And so just want to acknowledge that up front. My background, I've been in the Senate since 2011, from Catoosa, Oklahoma originally, also known as God's Country. Went to the University of Oklahoma and then worked for Tom Coburn for almost a decade when he was in the U.S. Senate and also the U.S. House, and then decided to run for office myself. Never had sights on being the pro tem, but just worked the way up, and am honored to serve in that capacity. It's the greatest professional honor I've had in my life. It's a huge deal. We have 48 members of our caucus and 30 or of the chamber. I'm sorry, 48 senators in Oklahoma, and 39 of them are Republicans. We do have one vacancy, the Stephanie Bice seat, obviously Congresswoman Bice now. So we're actually at 38. We have a special election in February and then April for the general. So hopefully that remains in our column, but we're strong caucus as well as the House caucus. Work extremely well with Speaker McCall and his caucus, and look forward to this session.
Thank you. And Speaker McCall, can you tell us a little bit about your background, what led you to become the Speaker of the House, and about the caucus that you lead?
Of course, thank you. Everyone this morning. My background, basically, my family is in community banking. I'm finishing my 29th year as a Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board for Ameris State Bank. In Atoka, we are a community bank with about 6 locations. And my path to public service was graduated University of Oklahoma back in 1992 and went into banking. My path basically just was birthed out of public service, community service, as it is, community bankers are expected to provide leadership in their community, and that led me to the city council for about 8 years, and then people in my district asking me to run for the state house as our legislator was terming out. Our caucus this year, we moved from a 77-member supermajority last year to an 82-member supermajority this year. It is the high-level mark for a House Republican caucus. For the first time in the state of Oklahoma, in our history, the House Republican caucus holds all 100% of the rural seats in the state, and the urban seats are split between Republicans and Democrats. So the total composition of the House for this session will be 82 R's, 19 D's. I think we have had in the past a greater level of stability in the House the last 3-4 years. And we've been able to work pretty well with our colleagues across the aisle. We really appreciate and enjoy a great relationship with the Oklahoma Senate, and I want to commend President Pro Tem Treat for his leadership and in the Senate, and we've had a relationship and continue looking forward to that. We are certainly concerned, as you are, about the economic situation, and it doesn't matter whether this economy is up or down. It's the state moves with oil and gas, and so we are very much interested in more than just conveying our thoughts. We're really more interested in hearing from the Petroleum Alliance on how we can be helpful, help foster the right environment for a big recovery in the oil and gas sector. But thank you, Adria. It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Pro Tem.
Team, if I could, let me run over some of the economics. I've been looking at some of the percentage declines in Oklahoma and comparing it to our peer states. And I want to share that at year end, Oklahoma led losses in rig activity among our peers, dropping 83.72% from the 2018 rig count high. As of January 17th, Oklahoma oil and gas production was at 31% off the 5-year high for oil production, 21% off the 5-year high for natural gas marketed production. The latest Baker Hughes rig count shows 17 rigs working in Oklahoma compared to 70 for New Mexico, 47 for Louisiana, 169 for Texas. And meanwhile, if we take a look at the full-time employment count, we have exceeded now 20,000 jobs lost since 2018 in the industry. Those are direct full-time oil and gas workers classified under NAICS code as extraction. So effectively, Oklahoma's full-time direct employment in oil and gas extraction is half the size of what it was in November 14, which was the peak. So we look forward to working with the House and the Senate to figure out ways that we can attract investment to Oklahoma, create jobs in Oklahoma, and support those who continue to commit resources here. So we look forward to a productive session with the legislature. Adria?
Yeah, and I want to thank you guys both, Speaker McCall and Pro Tem Treat, for your comments about oil and gas, and appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you about some of the things oil and gas is facing and how we could potentially do some positive things at the legislature this year. But we obviously know that there's a budget shortfall. We know that there's redistricting this year. There are a lot of things going on. So with session starting just less than 2 weeks away, tell us what we can expect to see at the session. Can we start with you, Mr. Speaker, this time?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Adria. The obvious things that we have to deal with this session. First of all, we have to deal with the implementation of State Question 802 that passed last June. And that's quite honestly, it's going to be very difficult. People of the state passed that question without a funding mechanism tied to it. So that's, we will probably have to somewhere find what's projected right now to be about a $750 million shortfall over the previous year, an additional, 200 million roughly, maybe a little less, um, to fund that healthcare initiative. The other thing that you mentioned, Adria, that we have constitutional um, requirement every 10 years for redistricting. That's already underway with town hall meetings across the state. By the time session starts February 1, we'll have concluded those, and once we get the census data, we'll be able to redraw the lines and shift things around. We certainly I expect to see a couple of seats from the rural part of the state in the House will be probably shifted to the urban area. We'll just have to wait and see what that census information truly is. That would be my anticipation. Um, as the bulk of the growth in the state has occurred in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, with a few exceptions, Bryan County down along the Texas Oklahoma state line in my quadrant of the state will show growth, and some of those other counties along the Red River. And there will be some up maybe northeast as well. Will be our anticipation. In terms of what will our other priorities be? Our legislation will be fully filed tomorrow in the House, and we'll get to see what that looks like. We're continuing to have conversations, and what we're really interested in the House is we have to deal with the COVID situation. Everybody does, but we need to see a strong rebound in our state's economy. I think I do want to commend Pro Tem Treat. I've maintained the same thought, stayed in the same vein, along with the governor, that we've got to keep our state's economy open to the greatest extent possible, and that's why we don't see a $1.4 billion shortfall. In my opinion, that's why we see, maybe 750 at this point, which is still big, but it's manageable. But we really need to look at the top drivers in the state of Oklahoma, which are oil and gas, which are aerospace, agriculture, tourism, and we need to come solutions to help those industries really rebound and go back into a strong growth cycle. Obviously the retail sectors, the restaurants and the realtors, have all been impacted. We've got a lot to consider, but I would certainly hope that we would, at your request and hopefully your industry and more specifically your organization would have, if you have some ideas as to some mechanisms to help that recovery take place quickly in the oil and in the energy sector. I know both Pro Tem Treat and myself, we reserve legislative vehicles, to assist with that. So the economy, jobs, that's the number one concern of people in the state of Oklahoma, even in terms of, in comparison to health. I think that most people recognize that, yes, it's terrible to have COVID. It's terrible for your neighbor to have COVID, but the only thing worse than having COVID is being broke and having COVID. So we really need to ensure that while we're addressing the health front, that we are doing everything possible to help oil and gas, the energy sector rebound, because that's what drives opportunity and prosperity for the state.
Fantastic. We appreciate that offer and have had some conversations with your leadership and look forward to having some more conversations with you. Actually, next week we have something on the calendar to discuss some ideas with you. So thank you very much for that. Pro Tem Treat, what do you think you'll see this session coming out of your chamber?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I think the speaker summed it up quite well. The highlights of what we're going to be going into. Redistricting, just to put a little icing on the cake about that, is we don't know exactly when we'll get those final numbers. With COVID, it's a delay, and our Constitution requires that we get it done within that session that we get the numbers. So we're going to be on a very tight timeline. toward the end of session. It will look like we're scrambling, but we're doing a lot of work right now. We're doing town halls. Both the House and Senate are having town halls around the state seeking input, communities of interest, trying to get as much dialogue and transparency around the redistricting process we can. The 164.8 million that we have to come up with Medicaid will be a big challenge, especially considering many, if not most, of my caucus were opposed to the state question personally. And so trying to come up with 165 million to pay for something that many of them are philosophically opposed to, and many of their constituents are, is not going to be a cakewalk, but the voters did pass it, and we'll have to figure out a way to implement it the least impact on other priorities. So those who pushed it the most will probably get the majority of the bill. And that's what we talked about last session. We had an arrangement, ended up being vetoed toward the end of session, but we did have some funding vehicles for that did not raise taxes. And I think you'll continue to see us committed to that end. You know, I've been here this going into my 11th session, I guess. I still don't know what a normal session is. People are always saying, do you want to get back to normal? There is no normal. There's always something that comes up. There's always a budget. I've been through an authentic $1.3 billion hole. Last April, we cut $1.3 billion based on a revenue recertification in April by the Board of Equalization. Those aggressive cuts will actually put us in a much better financial position this year with some cash on hand, because the revenue failure was really closer to about 800 million, 750. And so we have some cash on hand, but we did have to spend some one-time, about 500 million of cash last time. So it's not all roses, but it's in a much more manageable position than we've had in a long time. COVID, obviously put a damper on last session. We had to change some things up, but I applaud the work of the speaker and his colleagues and my colleagues in the Senate. We all banded together and changed the process pretty quickly and got it done and delivered balanced budget and got out of here and we're able to fund some things to help COVID. We're going through protocols right now, and I've got a small working group in the Senate of how are we going to handle session. It's going to be much more open than it was toward the end of last session. We kind of had to close things down. We were taking CDC guidelines, but there will be distancing, and there will be masks, and there will be different safety protocols here, and some other opportunities for people to participate remotely in committee and perhaps vote remotely on the floor. So we're working through all those things. Again, I have not seen normal. And so we try to minimize the abnormalities, I guess, is what we try to do going into this session. But I think there's some real opportunity moments as well. I think there's a tell on it, but with the Biden administration being sworn in today, I anticipate there will be some bans eventually on drilling on federal land, which is terrible for the industry. But it may drive some activity to Oklahoma and Texas. I've been talking to some people within your alliance that say there's probably a 3-year tell on that because they've been warehousing permits to be able to drill in New Mexico. But I think there is an upside eventually, even though it's terrible for the overall economy in the United States. It may drive some economics to the scoop and stack again in 2 or 3 years, which is hopeful. I've got a hopeful outlook. The 17 rig count that you mentioned, Brooke, is up from the last one I saw. So while it's still not where we should be, it's up from the 3 or 4 that I saw there for a while. And so I'm not an eternal optimist. I'm a realist. But I think we're going into this session with some real opportunity to try to put the pedal on some diversification of our economy. And I'm excited for it. There is an axiom, and I've heard other people say it. I didn't create this, but the more ink a bill gets, probably the less likely it is to move through the process. So be settled a little bit in your spirit when you read all these bills that seem outlandish and crazy and on the extremes. They get the most ink because they sell the most papers or get the most clicks on the internet, but they have the least likelihood of actually advancing to the governor's desk. So don't panic. The speaker and I do not see the bills before they're filed. We don't orchestrate everyone's bill request. It's a confidential process, and like you, we'll be looking anxiously tomorrow to see what actually gets filed.
Great. Well, thank you for all of that. And I had a couple of questions for you. And I wanted to clarify something, especially for our members on this call who maybe, don't always follow the political process closely. But so both of the leaders on this call talked about the Medicaid expansion state question and what that means to them. And I want to clarify and make sure everybody on this call understands that the legislature is tasked with, as they said, coming up with the money to pay for Medicaid expansion that Oklahomans voted for in June. And the reason that's pertinent to us, not just because we're all Oklahomans, but the reason that's pertinent is because the legislature has to come up with money somewhere. And so as an industry, we of course want to have the discussion about not raising taxes on business and that kind of thing. But we know that they have to come up with funding from somewhere. And so I think, I heard you say, Pro Tem Treat, that your caucus is committed to not increasing taxes, specifically on business and probably just in general, right?
Yes. So we've been through that. You all are familiar with that in 2018 when we had that. I hope that I've got 4 years left, and I hope in my tenure we don't have another 75% vote, which is required by 640 to raise taxes. Now, I will tell you there's some wordsmithing, and I don't want to get caught in a trap. When you say no taxes whatsoever, there's something called the provider fee, or you may hear it called SHOP, the Supplemental Hospital Offset Payment Plan, which the hospitals originally advocated for, to have an assessment that they turn around and get federal match on. It's a winner for most hospitals in the state of Oklahoma. There's some rhetoric going around that that's going to be considered a tax, even though 4% is already in statute, and we're just assessing 2.8 or I think it's 2.8 right now. So there may be some verbal gymnastics that people may try to play to say the SHOP is some kind of a tax increase. But as far as just a tax increase on business, on income, on all of that, no, that we have no desire to go there.
And Speaker McCall, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm in full agreement with the Pro Tem. We're not going to put forth a on the business community or an industry sector, other than we do have to continue. I mean, the obvious funding mechanism for Medicaid expansion will be the SHOP fee, and increasing that. And the Pro Tem spoke very eloquently on that. But I would add that the federal government would allow us to take that to 6%. That is the federal limit. We currently have up to 4% authorized in statute. We believe that we can take the current rate to 4% with just a simple majority vote, but exceeding 4 going to the maximum may trigger a higher threshold vote. So that would be the that was what was contemplated last year, taking that fee to 4. We had some money in the stabilization fund. We have some built up capacity in our FMAP. I think we're going to be okay in funding that, at least for a few years. But we will looking long term. Every other state that has adopted this has struggled with funding it because the costs are higher and the participation is higher than expected.
Yeah, I think you guys have a really tough job with that one. You didn't ask for it, and here you are having to figure out how to come up with the money and negotiate with the stakeholders who would be paying that fee. So, you guys do have a tough job, and we realize that. Federally, and it's a big deal in Oklahoma, and especially for oil and gas, but businesses in general. The McGirt case that recently came down from the Supreme Court, it's caused a lot of uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and I know truly there's no way to know at this point what's going to happen. But have you as the leaders of your caucuses, but also as leaders of your districts, have you heard from constituents on concerns about McGirt? Do you have any insight into what we might see down the road on that?
Who do you want to take that question first, Adrian?
Oh, good question. Well, Speaker McCall, do you mind going first?
I defer to Pro Tem if he'd like to go first on this one. But no, I'll be happy to take it. So, I think really, truly, the thing that concerns people in the state of Oklahoma more than anything is uncertainty. You pick the topic. It's not just McGirt. We're actually this Friday. We're bringing in a new bank location into our organization, and and nothing's going to change. The accounts are the same. The customers aren't going to see any changes. But when you go talk to them, they're concerned about any type of change or uncertainty. And the same thing exists with McGirt. And you have to be out there. You have to be talking about it. You have to be communicating. And the best thing that we can do to address the uncertainty is to open up robust lines of communication. I think the situation is navigable. I think our leadership wants to address it because we need to provide certainty in the state of Oklahoma. Every business that operates in the state of Oklahoma, and my family's business is in the eastern side of Oklahoma. That's the original Indian Territory part of the state, and where these what the Supreme Court has refers to as reservation. So yes, there are people that are wondering what the impact is, but I think they're looking to our leadership to try to resolve that, and I think there's a willingness to do so, and but to get an agreement, we all have to, there will have to be a consensus, and that's always the difficulty. But I think we will definitely something we will work to try to address and bring certainty to.
Do you see that agreement needing to be between the executive branch and our federal delegation, or who do you think, and the tribes, or who do you foresee that the agreement would need to be between? Because I think that's one of the questions is how can this be fixed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think you kind of have, I think there's three different rails, so to speak. With McGirt, there's two rails. I mean, the McGirt decision was specifically on a criminal case, had nothing to do with civil. But we know we're precluded at the state level from compacting on criminal matters. So if that situation on the criminal side is going to have to take congressional action to address, either they make the decision in Washington on how to address it, or just leave. If it stays the same, it just is what it is. On the civil side, and it's more hyperbole at this point in time, because McGirt did not deal with civil issues; it dealt with criminal. But I think it is reasonable to believe that there will be some cases introduced and that will be adjudicated through the courts on how that McGirt decision may apply to civil matters. Those will certainly take a very long time, because regardless of who prevails, there will likely be appeals and whatnot. But yes, we do have a concern on how it impacts revenue in the state of Oklahoma, how it impacts regulatory concerns. But we do know on the civil issues, we do have the ability to compact, to rectify those, and to bring everybody back into fellowship and agreement and a uniform approach. So on that rail, we already have the tools the mechanism to be able to address the civil issues, which I think are where the most uncertainty is. And I'm hopefully we'll be able to do that. But criminal, we do have to have federal intervention of some sort to either untie our hands to be able to address it at the state level in a manner that's we feel like is best for the state, or they can make that decision. But on the civil, I think we can, if there's a willingness on all parties, we can move forward and we can enter into agreements on this is how we're going to, this is going to how we're going to treat things.
Okay, thank you for that. Pro Tem Treat, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the speaker summed it up well. My district is wholly within Oklahoma County, the former unassigned lands, although I'm from Catoosa, as I mentioned earlier, and much of my caucus obviously represents eastern Oklahoma. And so and it's not just eastern Oklahoma, it comes into the south central part. The criminal, I think, is fairly easy to compact if the federal government gives us that authority. And many tribes aren't looking to create a prison system and all this stuff. So I think there's some eagerness to compact on that side. The civil, it's the fear of the unknown, and it's the fear of what could happen. There's already, as your members are well aware, the Creek Nation send out some tax bills on gross production tax, and they also sent out a notice to a grocery store that they owed taxes in Creek territory. And so there's already some rumblings. The Oneida case up north about permitting for a parade, they've already applied McGirt to a civil case. And so it's not just all fear. There's really how do you apply this? I think the justices that the U.S. Senate has confirmed in the current administration will be helpful in some ways, but you never know. I mean, the justice who wrote the opinion left the door wide open on the civil, and that's what's concerning. We've got good relationships with tribes in Oklahoma and the legislature. The opinion I'm not speaking about myself in third person, but the Treat v. Stitt that the speaker and I both had, the opinion from the Oklahoma Supreme Court on that case reinvigorated the legislative role in compacting and approving these compacts. There was a 1994 AG opinion that neutered our ability to have any influence, and then the Oklahoma Supreme Court case reinvigorated the importance of that. So we have a role to play, but we really are waiting for Congress to give us authority in compacting, and we're also trying to see if we can get on the same page with our tribal partners, many of whom we have tremendous relationships with. Obviously, if you go back in history a while, the Inhofe so-called midnight rider that he put on to stop the treatment of state status on environmental regulation should be of great concern to your industry about having multiple regulators in addition to the federal and state government. And so the implications are real, and they're scary if you carry them out to the nth degree. So hopefully we can come up with a good agreement. Dialogue is ongoing between the tribes, myself, and others about where do we go, and I hope to play a role in that in a positive way.
As we approach 45 minutes or so on this call coming up pretty soon, I just want to remind our viewers that there is an opportunity to ask questions. And what kind of things should we be thinking about that we haven't really covered today, Mr. Pro Tem? Things that are
well, Derek Allroad just came up with a question, so I'll go to that if you don't mind. He writes, "How is the work of LOFT going, and will we see difference in the budget process with its existence?" I think.
Do you mind explaining what LOFT is for those on this call that don't know what it is?
Everyone knows what LOFT is. Come on, Adria.
I know they do. Of course they do. Senate Bill 1, but just in case.
Yes.
Someone just moved from Texas.
It was the Speaker Pro Tem bill that created a legislative office of fiscal transparency. The legislature in Oklahoma was somewhat unique in the country where we didn't have our own ability to look at numbers and have independent numbers. And so the Speaker and I hired Mike Jackson, who some of you may have known from the state chamber in his time at the House of Representatives. He's assembled a tremendous team. They've done a lot of preliminary work. They did an analysis of the Board of Equalization and the certification packet, which was really helpful because one of the things they did was a 10-year look back on where have projections come on natural gas and where have they actually ended up. And so we can start actually budgeting off of real experience, not just a number from the Board of Equalization. And so I think long term, it's going to be extremely helpful. It's in its infancy right now. We need to make sure it gets off the ground in a very important way. But having been the vice chair of appropriations for a couple of years, my biggest frustration in that role was we spent the first 2 or 3 months of session just trying to reconcile our number differences and trying to figure out were the agencies hiding the ball from us somewhere. Why is our number different than the House? Why is our number completely different than the health department when they had the scare that they needed a lot of money and then ended up they were just hiding the ball? So long term, it's going to have a huge positive impact. I'm high on its potential, and we just need to make sure it launches correctly. I think the report it put out on Board of Equalization shows the type of worth it can have, because we can really change our practice. Right now, we spend 95% of what the Board of Equalization certifies, but if we see that number on natural gas is coming in at 87 or 86% over a 10-year period, let's be wise and start appropriating a lower amount so we're in a much better fiscal position. So I think it's got a tremendous upside to it.
Great. Speaker McCall, do you have any comments on Loft or?
I think the Pro Tem covered it very well.
Great. Do you have any other questions from folks on the phone or on the meeting? So Derek Albro, going back to redistricting, is it possible it could end up in a special session?
Well, it depends on, as the Pro Tem mentioned in his earlier comments, we don't know exactly when we're going to receive the U.S. Census data. And we do have a constitutional mandate to adjourn the regular session the last Friday in May. I think we'll have a lot of that work put together. I think we could, even if we receive the information, even in early May, I believe we'd still be able to complete the task in constitutional session. Beyond that, I think we probably have the ability to work off the 2019 projection information somewhat, and then codify the 20 information if it comes in late, subsequently to this session. But we really haven't. I've not had that conversation with the Pro Tem, but we would like, speaking of certainty, we would love to have some certainty as to when we're going to receive that information.
We have a question regarding the Open Meetings Act. Will it be amended to allow agencies some leeway to hold virtual meetings?
Yes, I think you'll see us in the first couple of weeks of session fast track, just an extension of what we did last year. That expired November 15th. There may be some cleanup language in it, but it will be substantially the same. I completely, as separate and apart from that, have some modernization that I want to do on open meetings, but that will not be fast track. The fast track will just be to give boards, commissions, city councils, county government some flexibility during this time of COVID. And I think we'll get that done in fairly quick fashion toward the beginning of session.
And the House is committed to running that early also.
Great. Well, Brooke, you're muted. Just
Sorry
okay.
about that. Adria, any other questions, any other thoughts that you want to relay?
Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you for not only being here this morning to speak to our members, but just for your leadership and your relationship with us as an industry. Looking forward to moving forward with that and working together on some improvements for the industry. So thank you both.
We appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some reminders about some upcoming morning fuels. Is there anything in closing that either the pro tem or the speaker would like to emphasize?
Charles, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Once again, just in closing, I think we have the opportunity to do to have a positive session despite challenges that we may have. I would like to encourage the Petroleum Alliance to please reach out to our offices. We're happy to take meetings anytime. We truly are focused on trying to build a recovery economically in the state. So I look forward to having that first meeting next week and subsequent meetings thereafter. But just let us know anytime. As the Pro Tem said, the Capitol will be open this session. We are going to great lengths to have safety protocols. If you wish to have a face-to-face meeting at the Capitol, we can make that happen. We just kind of need to know what size group you anticipate. But we're happy to come to your offices as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And please know also that our building is open for your use if you need to get away from that Capitol. We have some space for you, so please take advantage of that if you need it. Greg?
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it very much. Look forward to working with you this upcoming session as always, and hope that we can get together in person more often than virtual. I like seeing you face to face more than on the computer screen, but I'm thankful for technology as well. But this is going to be a session that has challenges, but it's not challenges that we haven't seen before except COVID, and we'll get through it, and we'll make sure that we treat your industry as well as we possibly can.
Right. We do have one final question. Looks like it's coming in. Is there any way to reduce the number of agencies we have in the state of Oklahoma?
Yes, we can consolidate.
And we have some in the past. The ABC book, the agencies, boards, and commissions, is still way too long. We have some work to do there. It's a matter of, do you find cost savings and do you still hit the mission if there is a mission for it? So we will continue to do that. You know, we've had some backlash since we combined agencies and OMES. So we did consolidate into the Office of Management and Enterprise Services. But we've had some complaints. So there's a little bit of a tide against it, although we're still conservative. We'd like to find more efficiencies in state government.
And I think that's another area that Loft will really help the legislature be able to identify consolidation possibilities.
Great. Well, listen, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any parting words before I cover the next morning fuel schedules?
I certainly appreciate you guys stepping in and talking to us. The kind words about our industry, at least the recognition of how important it is to our state. You know, one thing that other than the potential the Medicaid shortfall, the only question I would have asked is that overall there is going to be a shortfall in the budget, and you know, maybe in big baskets, what's our plan? I'm sure it's I don't want to back you guys into a corner, but obviously we don't want to discourage investment in our state any more than it already is by adding burdens, whether they be regulatory or taxes. So we just want y'all to keep that in mind. I think we are going to come up with some creative things that could possibly help our production, help attract additional investment by the companies that are here as well as others that aren't here right now. So I will hope you have an open ear to those things when we bring them up to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, gentlemen, again, for your leadership and for your willingness to visit with us today. Your participation is always welcome. So thank you very much to both of you. With that, Cody, do you mind throwing up the next slide? I want to remind everyone of the next morning fuel. It is going to be next Wednesday with employment law expert Chelsea Smith, who will discuss what the COVID-19 vaccine rollout will mean for employers and employees in terms of workplace safety. and how to structure a vaccination policy, as well as understanding the legal aspects of vaccine policies. And then on February 3rd, we're going to get back to talking a little bit more about McGirt with Attorney General Mike Hunter. So thank you all for joining us today, and we do appreciate you. Again, thanks to Canyon Creek Energy for hosting us this morning in Tulsa. We look forward to doing more of these remotely as well. Thank you.